I was celebrating our first married weekend when my husband left the table. Then a quiet woman shoved an envelope into my hand and mouthed, "Run through the kitchen window now." Tell me where you're watching from below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories. You know that feeling when your life is so perfect it almost scares you? That was me 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. God, it feels like a lifetime. My name is Mara, and I thought I had everything figured out. I was 34, owned the most popular bakery in downtown Portland, and I just married the man of my dreams. Or at least, the man I thought was my dreams. That Saturday night, we were at Elevation, this gorgeous rooftop bistro that overlooks the whole city. The kind of place where you go to celebrate big moments, you know? The warm scent of their wood-fired ovens mixed with the cool autumn air, and the city lights stretched out below us like scattered diamonds. Jonah had his hand over mine, and we were talking about our honeymoon plans, about maybe expanding the bakery, about the future we were going to build together. I remember thinking how lucky I was. How after all those years of failed relationships and putting everything into my business, I'd finally found someone who got me. Someone who supported my crazy hours, who understood why I had to be at the bakery by 4 in the morning to get the croissants just right. Jonah would bring me coffee when I was working late, and he'd sit in the corner booth reading while I finished the books. He made me feel safe, protected, loved. God, what a fool I was. So there we were, sharing this incredible chocolate souffle. I was critiquing their technique, naturally, when his phone started buzzing. He frowned, pulled it out, and his whole demeanor changed. Just like that. The warmth in his eyes went cold, distant. "I'm so sorry, babe," he said, already standing up. "It's work. This client emergency I've been dreading all week. Give me just 2 minutes to sort this out." He kissed my forehead, and I watched him walk toward the elevator, phone already pressed to his ear. I remember feeling this tiny prick of irritation. Our first weekend as a married couple, and work was still interrupting. But I pushed it down. That's what you do when you love someone, right? You give them the benefit of the doubt. I was idly stirring my coffee when I noticed her. This elderly woman at the table next to ours, probably in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She kept staring at me. Not casual people watching staring, intense, purposeful staring. Like she was trying to memorize my face. At first, I thought maybe she recognized me from the bakery. I get that sometimes. But something about her expression made my skin crawl. Her eyes were wide, almost frantic, and she kept glancing toward the elevator where Jonah had disappeared. I tried to ignore her, focused on the city lights, but I could feel her gaze burning into me. When I finally looked back, she was leaning forward, her mouth moving without sound. It took me a second to realize she was trying to tell me something. Then she did something that changed everything. She reached into her purse, pulled out a thick envelope, and before I could react, she leaned over and pressed it into my hands. Her fingers were ice cold and shaking. "Get out the back window," she whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear her. "He's not who he says he is. I lost my daughter to him." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her, my heart suddenly pounding, and she nodded toward the kitchen. "The service window. Now, before he comes back." I wanted to ask her what she meant, wanted to demand an explanation, but the terror in her eyes stopped me. This wasn't some confused old woman. This was someone who'd seen something terrible, and she was trying to save me from it. My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. Inside was a thick wad of cash, had to be at least $2,000, and a handwritten note that said simply, "Trust no one. Disappear. Find me at Riverside Diner tomorrow at noon. Agnes." That's when I saw them. 2 men in dark suits had just stepped off the elevator. Big men, the kind who looked like they crushed things for a living. They were scanning the restaurant methodically, and when their eyes found me, I felt my blood turn to ice. But it wasn't just the men. It was Marcus, The maitre d' who'd been so charming when we'd arrived, who'd complimented Jonah on his lovely wife and made sure we got the best table. Now he was watching me too, and his friendly smile had been replaced by something cold and calculating. The woman, Agnes, was right. I was in danger, and I didn't even understand why. I forced myself to stay calm, to act normal. I took a sip of my coffee, checked my phone like I was reading a text. But my mind was racing. How long had Jonah been gone? 5 minutes? 10? And where the hell was he? I stood up slowly, like I was just going to the restroom. The two men immediately shifted, moving to flank the main exit. My chest tightened. They were cutting off my escape routes. I walked toward the back of the restaurant, past the bar, trying to look casual. The kitchen was behind a set of swinging doors, and I could hear the clatter of pans and the sharp voices of the line cooks. There had to be a service entrance back there, a way for deliveries to come in. But before I could reach the doors, Marcus appeared in front of me, that cold smile plastered on his face. "Mrs. Chin," he said, using my married name with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. "Going somewhere?" "Just to the ladies' room," I managed. "I'm afraid that area is closed for cleaning right now. Perhaps you'd like to return to your table? Your husband will be back any moment." The way he said husband made it sound like a threat. And that's when I heard it, Jonah's voice coming from the kitchen area, talking to someone in low, urgent tones. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was all wrong. Not the voice of a man handling a work emergency. The voice of someone giving orders. "Actually," I said, backing away from Marcus, "I think I'll wait for my husband by the elevator." But when I turned, the two men in suits were there, blocking that route too. One of them spoke into a radio, and I caught the words, "package secured." Package. They were talking about me like I was cargo. That's when the panic really hit. My new husband, the man I'd promised to love and cherish just 3 weeks ago, had somehow orchestrated this. The romantic dinner, the perfect setting, even the table selection. It was all a setup. I heard a heavy metal sound from somewhere in the restaurant, locks engaging, maybe, or security doors sliding shut. The few other diners seemed oblivious, lost in their own conversations, but I suddenly felt like I was in a cage. My eyes darted around frantically, looking for any way out. That's when I remembered Agnes's words about the back window. The kitchen. I had to get to the kitchen. I pretended to stumble, knocking into a busboy carrying a tray of glasses. They crashed to the floor in a spectacular shower of crystal and wine. In the chaos that followed, servers rushing over, Marcus shouting orders, the suit-wearing men momentarily distracted, I bolted for the kitchen doors. The kitchen was a maze of stainless steel and heat. Line cooks looked up in surprise as I ran past them, but I didn't stop to explain. I could hear shouting behind me, heavy footsteps pursuing me. There, at the far end of the kitchen, a service window that opened onto a fire escape. It was narrow, probably used for deliveries or waste removal, but it was my only shot. I grabbed a chair, smashed it against a bright red emergency panel on the wall. Alarms started blaring immediately, and the kitchen erupted in confusion. The cooks dropped their pans and started evacuating through the main doors, creating a human barricade between me and my pursuers. The service window was about 4 feet off the ground and barely wide enough for a person. I hauled myself up and through, scraping my arms on the metal frame, not caring about the pain. Behind me, I could hear Jonah's voice, closer now, shouting my name. "Mara. Mara, what are you doing? Come back." He sounded concerned, loving even. Like he was a worried husband whose wife was having some kind of breakdown. The act was so perfect it made me sick. I dropped onto the fire escape, my knees hitting the metal grating hard enough to bring tears to my eyes. 3 stories down, the alley stretched between tall buildings, lit only by a single streetlight. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my heels echoing in the narrow space. By the time I reached the street, I was sobbing. Not from pain, but from the sheer betrayal of it all. How long had Jonah been planning this? Had anything about our relationship been real? Our first date, when he'd shown up at the bakery with flowers just as I was closing. The way he'd proposed, on one knee in the middle of Pioneer Courthouse Square? Had all of it been a lie? I flagged down a taxi 3 blocks away, my hands still shaking as I gave the driver my friend Sarah's address. Sarah and I had been friends since culinary school, and she was the only person I could think of who might believe this insane story. "You okay, honey?" the driver asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just drive," I whispered. "Please." During the 20-minute ride across town, I tried to process what had just happened. I called my bank to check my accounts, and that's when the second wave of horror hit. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Chin," the automated system informed me, "but your accounts have been frozen due to suspicious activity. Please visit a branch office during normal business hours." Frozen. My accounts, the ones I'd built up over 15 years of running my bakery, were frozen. I called again, thinking it was a mistake, but got the same message. Then I checked my email on my phone, and my world collapsed completely. There was a message from my property management company, time estimated just 2 hours earlier. "We have received the signed transfer documents for your apartment at 1247 Hawthorne Boulevard. As per your request, the lease has been terminated effective immediately. Please arrange for removal of your personal belongings by Monday." Transfer documents. I had never signed any transfer documents. I loved that apartment. It was a loft above a bookstore, with exposed brick walls and huge windows that let in perfect morning light. I'd lived there for 8 years. But somehow, my signature was on legal documents transferring my home to someone else. Just like my bank accounts, everything I owned had been stripped away in a matter of hours. I was homeless. Penniless. And I had no idea how deep this conspiracy went. Sarah wasn't home when the taxi dropped me off. I sat on her front steps for 2 hours, wrapped in the jacket Agnes had somehow managed to slip into the envelope along with the cash. When Sarah finally arrived, I must have looked like I'd escaped from a mental institution. "Mara? Oh my God, what happened to you?" I told her everything. The dinner, Agnes's warning, the men in suits, the frozen accounts. Sarah listened with growing horror, holding my hands as I cried. "Stay here tonight," she said immediately. "We'll figure this out in the morning." But I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Agnes's note. I lost my daughter to him. What did that mean? And how had she known to find me at that restaurant? The next morning, I took the bus to Riverside Diner, a grimy little place by the industrial district. Agnes was there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall, scanning everyone who walked in. She looked smaller in daylight, frilier, but her eyes still held that same intensity from the night before. "You came," she said as I slid into the booth across from her. "Good. That means you're starting to understand." "Understand what?" I demanded. "Who are you? How do you know my husband?" Agnes pulled out a manila folder and spread its contents across the table. Photographs. Newspaper clippings. Legal documents. My hands went numb as I realized what I was looking at. "Your husband's name isn't Jonah Chin," Agnes said quietly. "It's Marcus Webb. And my daughter Emma was his second wife." She pointed to a newspaper clipping dated 5 years earlier. The headline read, "Local teacher dies in hiking accident." The photo showed a young woman with bright eyes and a wide smile, standing next to a man who looked exactly like my Jonah. "Emma was 28 when she married him," Agnes continued. "She was a kindergarten teacher, loved kids, wanted to start a family. 6 months after the wedding, she died in what the police called a tragic accident. Fell off a cliff during a solo hike." My throat was closing up. "Solo hike? But..." "Emma was terrified of heights," Agnes said. "She wouldn't even go up in elevators above the 3rd floor. The idea that she would go hiking alone on mountain trails? Impossible. But Marcus. Your Jonah, he convinced everyone she'd been working on conquering her fears." Agnes turned to another document. 3 weeks after Emma's funeral, her life insurance paid out $300,000. A month after that, her apartment was sold and the money transferred to an offshore account. Marcus disappeared for 2 years. She spread out more photographs. Then he showed up in Seattle. New name, new identity. Married a woman named Jessica Park, a successful real estate agent. 8 months later, Jessica died in a car accident. Single vehicle, late at night, drove off a bridge into the Sound. The photos kept coming. 5 women over the past 8 years. All successful, all with significant assets. All dead within a year of marrying the man I knew as Jonah Chin. How is this possible? I whispered. How can someone just keep doing this? Money, Agnes said bitterly. Money and connections. Marcus, or whatever his real name is. He's connected to some very powerful people. People who can forge documents, manipulate investigations, create new identities. She pointed to another document. This is a property transfer form for your apartment. See the signature? It's good, isn't it? Almost perfect. I stared at my own signature on the document. It was identical to how I actually signed my name, down to the little flourish on the M. But I had never signed this paper. They've been studying you, Agnes said. For months, probably. Learning your routines, your signature, your financial habits. Getting close enough to copy everything they need. The room was spinning. But why didn't you go to the police? Why didn't someone stop him before? I did go to the police. Agnes's voice cracked with fury. I spent 3 years of my life trying to get someone to listen. I had evidence, I had patterns, I had proof that my daughter would never have gone hiking alone. You know what they told me? Grief makes people see conspiracies where none exist. That I needed to accept my daughter's death and move on. She leaned forward, her eyes blazing. I was watching that restaurant because I've been tracking him for 2 years. Trying to figure out his pattern, his next target. When I saw you there with him, looking so happy, so trusting. I couldn't let it happen again. I couldn't lose another daughter. The weight of that hit me like a physical blow. This woman had been watching me, protecting me, trying to save a stranger because the system had failed her own child. What do we do? I asked. How do we stop him? Agnes pulled out a key. There's an office downtown. 17th floor of the Morrison Building. It's where they keep the real records, the ones that show all the different identities, all the financial transfers. I've been watching it for months, but I could never get inside. How did you get a key? I know someone who cleans the building. Took me 6 months to convince her, but she finally agreed to help. She lost her sister in a similar situation 3 years ago. Agnes gripped my hand across the table. We have one chance to get evidence solid enough that even the most corrupt cop couldn't ignore it. But it has to be tonight. Security shifts change at midnight, and there's a 20-minute window when the cameras reset. I thought about everything I'd lost in the past 24 hours. My home, my money, my trust in the man I'd promised to love forever. But more than that, I thought about Emma and Jessica and the 3 other women whose photos were spread across this diner table. Women who'd trusted the wrong person and paid with their lives. I'm in, I said. Agnes smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Good. Because tomorrow might be too late. They're moving fast with you, faster than with the others. I think they've learned that dragging it out gives people too much time to ask questions. That night, we met at 11:30 outside the Morrison Building. Agnes had brought a small bag of tools and what looked like a professional camera. We need photos of everything, she explained as we rode the elevator to the 17th floor. Documents, computer screens, anything that proves the pattern. The office was small and unremarkable, with the kind of generic furniture you'd find in any low-rent business space. But the filing cabinets told a different story. Agnes knew exactly where to look. She went straight to a cabinet marked Asset Management and started pulling out files. Each one contained information about a different woman, photos, financial records, forged documents, even psychological profiles. My own file was terrifyingly thick. They had photos of me at the bakery, at home, out with friends. They had copies of my bank statements, my lease, my business insurance policies. There were notes about my daily routines, my fears, my dreams for the future. Jesus, I breathed, flipping through pages of surveillance notes. They've been watching me for 8 months. But the worst part was the summary sheet at the front of my file. It was written in clinical, detached language, like I was a business transaction. Subject shows strong emotional attachment to deceased parents' bakery recipes. Recommend leveraging nostalgic manipulation. Death scenario: kitchen fire, evening hours, staged electrical malfunction. Insurance payout: $847,000 combined life and business policies. They had planned my murder, down to the exact method and the expected profit margin. We need to document all of this, Agnes whispered, already taking photos. I grabbed files for the other women, my hands shaking with rage. Emma's file contained photos from her last day alive, surveillance shots of her going to work, buying groceries, completely unaware that her husband was planning to kill her that weekend. Jessica's file included floor plans of her house and notes about her daily schedule. One margin note made my stomach turn. Subject works late Fridays. Empty house 8 to 10 p.m. optimal window. As I photographed page after page of evidence, I thought about these women's families. Parents who'd lost daughters. Friends who'd lost best friends. All of them told the deaths were accidents, told to stop asking questions, told to move on. That's when we heard the elevator. Agnes and I froze, listening to the mechanical whir as it climbed toward our floor. It was 12:47 a.m. The security shift should have ended 20 minutes ago. Hide, Agnes whispered, shoving files back into cabinets. Get under the desk. But I could see her hands shaking as she tried to close the filing cabinet. We'd gotten careless, pulled out too many files, left too much evidence of our presence. The elevator doors opened, and I heard voices in the hallway. Male voices, talking in low, urgent tones. Check the lock, one of them said. If that old woman got in here. They knew. Somehow, they knew we were here. Agnes grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a small supply closet at the back of the office. We squeezed inside just as the main door opened. Through the crack in the closet door, I could see them clearly. Jonah Marcus, whatever his real name was, entered first, followed by the 2 men in suits from the restaurant. Behind them came a woman in an expensive business suit who looked like she could buy and sell people for a living. The cleaning woman talked, the suited woman said. We'll deal with her tomorrow, but right now we need to find that old bitch and the wife. Wife. They still thought of me as property to be managed. Marcus went straight to my file cabinet and started checking the documents. Someone's been through these. Recent prints on the folders, papers out of order. How much do you think they got? One of the suit men asked. Enough to be a problem, Marcus replied. His voice was different now, colder, more efficient. Nothing like the warm, loving tone I'd heard for months. We need to accelerate the timeline. Kitchen fire tomorrow night. Make it look like she was working late and something went wrong with the gas line. Tomorrow night. They were going to kill me tomorrow night. The woman in the business suit was walking around the office, examining everything with sharp eyes. Clean this place out. Everything gets moved to the Seattle location. And find those 2 women before morning. Agnes squeezed my hand so tight it hurt. In the dim light of the closet, I could see tears streaming down her face. These people were talking about murdering me like they were planning a dinner party. What about the bakery staff? Marcus asked. Some of them are pretty close to her. Kitchen fire should take care of any questions, the woman replied. Tragic accident. Investigation shows faulty equipment. Case closed. They weren't just planning to kill me. They were planning to burn down my bakery, my life's work, and potentially hurt or kill my employees in the process. That's when Agnes made her choice. Before I could stop her, she pushed open the closet door and stepped out. You're not going to hurt anyone else, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. The four people in the office turned toward her, and I saw Marcus smile. It was the same charming smile he'd used on me countless times, but now I could see the cruelty underneath it. "Mrs. Henderson," he said conversationally. "Still having trouble accepting your daughter's death, I see." "I know what you are," Agnes replied. "And I know what you did to Emma." "Your daughter died in a hiking accident," the woman in the suit said coldly. "The investigation was thorough and conclusive. Perhaps it's time you sought professional help for your delusions." "Delusions?" Agnes laughed bitterly. "I have photos, documents, evidence." "You have the desperate fantasies of a grieving mother who can't accept reality," Marcus interrupted. "Now, where is my wife? I'm very concerned about her mental state after her episode at the restaurant." "She's somewhere safe," Agnes said. "Somewhere you'll never find her." That's when one of the suitmen moved. He was fast, but Agnes was ready for him. She grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from the desk and brought it down on his wrist as he reached for her. The man screamed and stumbled backward, clutching his arm. In the chaos that followed, Agnes threw herself at the filing cabinet, pulling out handfuls of documents and scattering them across the floor. "Run," she shouted toward the closet. "Get out of here. Take the photos." The other suitman had her by the arms now, but she kept fighting, kicking at his shins, trying to buy me time. Marcus was moving toward the closet, his face a mask of cold fury. I had about 10 seconds before he found me. I burst out of the closet and ran for the door, clutching the camera with all our evidence. Behind me, I could hear Agnes still fighting, still shouting for me to run. "Stop her," the woman yelled. "She has the photos." I made it to the elevator and punched the button frantically. The doors opened immediately, thank God they hadn't thought to disable it. As the elevator descended, I could hear Agnes screaming. Not in fear, but in rage. She was buying me time with her own safety, maybe her own life. I ran 6 blocks before I stopped, ducking into a 24-hour diner and locking myself in the bathroom. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the camera to review the photos we'd taken. But they were there. Clear, detailed images of the files, the surveillance photos, the murder plans. Everything we needed to prove that Marcus Webb was a serial killer who'd been operating for at least 8 years. I tried calling 911, but stopped before hitting send. Agnes had spent 3 years trying to get police to listen to her. What made me think they'd believe me now, especially when powerful people were obviously protecting Marcus? No, I needed to do something bigger. Something public. Something that couldn't be ignored or covered up. That's when I remembered the Portland Business Awards ceremony. It was scheduled for the following evening at the convention center, a huge public event with media coverage, local politicians, business leaders. Marcus's uncle was being honored as Businessman of the Year. Perfect. I spent the rest of the night at a 24-hour print shop, making copies of every photo we'd taken. Dozens of copies. I organized them into presentation boards, arranged them chronologically, highlighted the most damning evidence. But first, I had to know what had happened to Agnes. The next morning, I called the Portland police and asked about any incidents at the Morrison building. The desk sergeant was brusque and unhelpful at first, but eventually confirmed that an elderly woman had been found dead in an office building, apparent heart attack. Heart attack. Right. I hung up and cried for 20 minutes. Agnes Henderson had died trying to save me, trying to get justice for her daughter. She'd sacrificed everything so that I could escape with the evidence. I wasn't going to let that sacrifice be meaningless. The convention center was buzzing with activity when I arrived that evening. Portland's business elite mingled in the lobby, dressed in expensive suits and cocktail dresses, celebrating their own success. I dressed carefully for the occasion. My best black dress, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a professional style. I wanted to look credible, not like a crazy woman making wild accusations. Marcus's uncle, Robert Webb, was seated at the head table on stage. He was a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, the kind who probably owned half the real estate in downtown Portland. Next to him sat the mayor, 2 city council members, and the president of the Chamber of Commerce. I waited until the dinner was finished and the award presentation began. Robert Webb stood to accept his plaque, making a speech about community leadership and family values. Family values. From the uncle of a serial killer. When he finished speaking and the applause died down, I stood up. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "I have something important to share about the Webb family's values." Security guards were already moving toward me, but I was ready. I held up the first presentation board, a clear photo of Emma Henderson's case file, with Marcus's handwriting documenting her murder. "Robert Webb's nephew is a serial killer," I announced. "His name is Marcus Webb, though he's been using the identity Jonah Chin. Over the past 8 years, he has murdered at least 5 women after marrying them and stealing their assets." The ballroom erupted. People were standing, pointing, talking over each other. The security guards had stopped, unsure how to handle a situation that was rapidly becoming a public relations nightmare. I held up another board showing the surveillance photos of me, the planned timeline for my murder. These documents showed detailed plans for my death, scheduled for tonight. My bakery was supposed to burn down in an electrical fire that would kill me and potentially my employees. Someone in the crowd shouted, "This woman is clearly disturbed." But others were leaning forward, studying the documents I was holding. That's when something beautiful happened. A woman near the back of the room stood up. "I know her," she called out. "That's my sister Jessica. She died 3 years ago in a car accident in Seattle." Another voice, "Emma Henderson was my daughter's teacher. She would never have gone hiking alone." More people were standing now, connecting the dots, recognizing the photos of their dead loved ones. The room was filling with an energy that security couldn't control. I pulled out the most damning evidence, the financial records showing the pattern of asset transfers, the insurance payouts, the offshore accounts. "This is a carefully orchestrated criminal enterprise," I continued. "These women were selected, studied, manipulated, and murdered for profit. And it's been protected by people in positions of power who benefit from these crimes." Robert Webb was still standing at the podium, his face pale with shock. Or maybe with the realization that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. "This is absurd," he finally managed. "My nephew is a respected businessman." "Your nephew is a killer," I interrupted. "And I have the documentation to prove it." The mayor leaned toward his microphone. "Ma'am, these are very serious accusations. If you have evidence of criminal activity, you should present it to law enforcement." "Law enforcement has been ignoring this evidence for years," I shot back. "Agnes Henderson spent 3 years trying to get someone to investigate her daughter's death. She died 2 nights ago trying to help me gather this proof. How many more women have to die before someone takes action?" The crowd was getting restless. Reporters were taking photos, recording everything on their phones. This was exactly what I'd hoped for, too public to cover up, too documented to deny. That's when the ballroom doors opened and police officers flooded in. But they weren't there to arrest me. They were there to arrest Marcus. I turned to see him being led through the crowd in handcuffs, flanked by FBI agents. Behind them walked the woman in the business suit from the office, also in custody. One of the agents approached the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the disruption. We've been conducting an ongoing investigation into a criminal conspiracy involving fraud, identity theft, and murder. Tonight's presentation has provided crucial evidence for our case." The irony wasn't lost on me. My desperate public accusation had forced law enforcement to act on an investigation they'd apparently been conducting in secret. But I wasn't finished. I held up one final board, a list of names. "These are the women who died," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. Emma Henderson, Jessica Park, Linda Morrison, Sarah Kim, Angela Davis, They deserve to be remembered. They deserve justice. And their families deserve the truth. As I read each name, people throughout the crowd began to stand. Family members, friends, coworkers of the victims. Some were crying, some were angry, but all of them were finally being heard. The investigation that followed was massive. Federal agencies got involved, financial records were subpoenaed, and the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Marcus Webb wasn't working alone. He was part of a sophisticated criminal network that targeted wealthy, successful women across multiple states. The woman in the business suit turned out to be a corrupt lawyer who specialized in creating false identities and forged documents. The two men in suits were hired muscle with connections to organized crime. And Robert Webb? Well, Robert Webb claimed complete ignorance of his nephew's activities, but financial records told a different story. My apartment lease was restored, my bank accounts unfrozen, and I was able to return to my bakery. But nothing felt the same. How do you trust anyone when the person you loved most in the world was planning your murder? My employees were incredible. They'd kept the bakery running while I was missing, never doubting that I'd come back. When I told them how close they'd come to being victims of Marcus's final plan, we all cried together. The legal proceedings took months. Marcus was eventually sentenced to life, without parole for 5 counts of murder and numerous other charges. His accomplices received lengthy sentences as well. Several corrupt officials who'd helped cover up the crimes were also prosecuted. Agnes Henderson's case was officially reopened, and her daughter Emma's death was reclassified as a homicide. It was a small victory, but one that mattered enormously to me. I testified in court 6 times. Each time I told Agnes's story as well as my own. How she'd risked everything to save a stranger. How she died fighting to protect me and expose the truth. The hardest part was reading the victim impact statements from the other families. Learning about who these women really were, beyond Marcus's clinical surveillance notes. Emma, the kindergarten teacher who stayed late to help struggling students. Jessica, the real estate agent who donated her commissions to homeless shelters. Linda, the nurse who worked double shifts during the pandemic. Marcus had stolen more than their money and their lives. He'd stolen their futures, their dreams, their chance to make the world better. Today, I still run my bakery. I still get up at 4 in the morning to make croissants. But everything's different now. I know how quickly a perfect life can become a nightmare. I know how easily evil can disguise itself as love. But I also know something else. I know that when the worst happens, when everything you trust turns out to be a lie, you can still fight back. You can still find allies in unexpected places. You can still make your voice heard. Agnes Henderson saved my life, and I'll never forget that. But she also taught me something crucial. Sometimes the only way to get justice is to demand it so loudly, so publicly, so undeniably that the people in power have no choice but to listen. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the people in your life who might need help, please share it. Like and subscribe to hear more true stories like this one. And tell me, would you have spoken out in front of everyone? Would you have risked everything to expose the truth? Because sometimes, that's the only way evil gets stopped. When ordinary people decide they've had enough and refuse to be silent anymore. Remember Emma. Remember Jessica. Remember Linda and Sarah and Angela. Remember Agnes, who died trying to save a stranger. And remember that your voice matters. Your courage matters. When you see something wrong, when you witness injustice, when someone needs help, speak up. Because silence is how predators survive. But truth, spoken loudly enough and courageously enough, can bring down even the most powerful criminals. Never stop fighting for what's right. Lives depend on it.